Keith, I'm just
Sorry, I'm late.
great. I'm just going to rename you, Keith.
All right, thanks.
Of
So
course.
we won't see you, we only hear you, right?
Yes, correct.
Keith, Bodwell.
Correct.
Great. All right, Karen, I'm going to go ahead and let those waiting in.
Okay,
Great.
Mayor 27.
This wall is hurting. Good.
uh-oh, we have people that are not muted.
Yeah, I would just announce everyone that's hopping on to mute themselves if possible. And then I'll, and James, since you're acting chair, I just asked all your fellow commissioners to unmute themselves so they can speak freely.
Very good. So should we get going? It's now 7:05. Call the meeting to order. We have present myself, James Laporta, acting chair. Let's see, we have regular members, Keith Bodwell. Hopefully Stephen Sicardi will be showing up to the screen. Let's see, Anna Tamel and Phil West are out of town. So we're going to see Bruce Bennett for Anna Tamel and Christine Gray for Phil West. Let's see, we'll get right in with the approval of minutes for the September 28th special meeting. So any comments on that? Anybody have a, hopefully we all got a chance to look at them.
It was
I'll
very
hear a
detailed.
motion to approve unless there's some comments.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. New applications? Looks like
None.
None. Pending applications?
None.
Moving right along, staff reports.
I am going to report that I'm working on updating permits. It's a work in progress. I am finding that to make all of the permits consistent with each other and get the language in is going to require some time. And I think that they will be better as soon as we also start to move forward in some of our regulatory changes. The other thing is the amended agenda that was put up on the website today has 4 zoning permits, which I'm going to put underneath this report. The first one being the garden shed that I've approved. It's in support of the community garden down on the Lorch Farm. Oops, Steve's in. Leah Zimini is a shed up on College Street. I have yet to get out and inspect it, but I expect that that will be approved. Jim Harity and Libby Mitchell are starting on their new house on Dibble Hill. They're waiting for area health approval. But
Anna didn't.
Oh, somebody needs to be muted.
I just got it, Karen.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And then Dunham Carroll, this is just so you know, the Dunham Carroll residents on the corner of Pine Street and Jewel Street, all of those buildings are on one lot. So the barn that's next to Tommy Eucalito's house, that's where they're making the alterations. That's one of the big Marblewood School buildings. I think it might have been the cafeteria or something, and they have studio space in there. And so they're making all sorts of reconfigurations in the interior for their studios and storage and workshop. And they've also added a generator, underground propane, and they're doing some septic improvements down there. But that is one campus, if you're wondering where all of these pieces are going. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna leave it at that.
And Karen, did you need help with redoing the application forms, or are you still good with handling that on your own?
Christine Gray has kindly offered to help me out on some format, and when I get to that phase, I will certainly take her up on it.
Right.
So,
Okay, correspondence and communications.
the first piece is a housing forum update. Janelle will be addressing the protocol for that and how the matter will be handled by this commission. The second piece of correspondence is the YouTube links for the fifth Thursday that was on Lake Health that I was in attendance, and Anna has had her report for it. And then I want to report that I did the Lenges received email correspondence this afternoon after my normal hours. It was from Joanne Vodashak, and it was received after the final amended agenda was posted at noon. The correspondence is, I'm acknowledging the correspondence was received, and copies are available in the land use office upon request. That's what our agenda reads. The correspondence will be reviewed. There is no public comment on the agenda tonight.
Now that email was also sent out to a mailing list, I believe. Is that right?
It would appear so.
Okay. It may not be the right forum, but that is a mailing list I never signed up for and have been asked to be taken off.
I can simply say, Christine, that anybody that has advised me of being on that mailing list, that you need to respond via email to the sender of those emails and ask to be taken off.
Okay. I have done that. I will do so again.
I think YouTube is actually YOU, right?
Yes. Yes, James, I saw that too.
Yeah, but that's okay. We all knew what you were talking about. Other business proper to come before the commission.
I have nothing unless Janelle wants to jump in on the housing report. It's up to
Yeah,
you.
I would-
Whenever.
Sure. I would love to orient the commissioners for the upcoming, it's a housing plan presentation. So I do hear some background noise, the phone ringing. I think we got it under control. Oh, no worries. So October 20th is the housing plan presentation. The Cornwall Affordable Housing Steering Committee has spent about 10 months working on affordable housing plan, which I facilitated. Gordon Ridgway has acted as the chair. That plan presentation is planned for that evening. So we will walk through the plan, get into the context of the plan, get into the content of the plan, and open it up for questions. There's a public comment period, which is now open. Comments can come via email. A form has been set up to formulate those comments should anyone need a little bit of guidance around how the Affordable Housing Steering Committee will be looking at the comments. That's certainly a helpful tool. And just for the Planning and Zoning Commission's role, just so all of you are aware, as far as reviewing the plan and approving the plan within your scope, it's simply to determine that the plan is in accordance with the existing town plan of conservation and development. So the plan of conservation and development was adopted in 2020. Affordable housing plans are statutorily required. So it's a new requirement of the state under 830J. And this plan is updated every 5 years. The P&Z simply endorses the plan because many of the regulatory suggestions will very likely fall back onto the P&Z's plate. Just want to remind everyone, so the affordable housing plan is an advisory document, and any suggestions to the P&Z certainly goes through all the proper channels that the P&Z is getting very well accustomed to going through. So any regulatory changes would be public hearing, and, you know, open to that period of public comment as well. So in short, the affordable housing plan does have a lot of planning and zoning, land use reform suggestions in there, and it's up to the commission to discern if it's in line with the general goals that are articulated in the town plan. Gordon, did you want to add anything? Did I cover everything? If you're there.
Yeah, I think you did. I just encourage people to come, and we are, the plan is available.
Yeah, and I do want to say from the commission, I certainly welcome all long form comments. So should you wish to read it and really go in depth and have suggestions for the steering committee, by all means, feel free to send them along. Those are definitely welcome. The steering committee will reconvene after the housing forum to really digest all of the suggestions coming through. So, but the role of the commission, just want to make it very clear of what it is as far as the approval of the plan.
And we will be holding a hearing on the plan
Mhm.
in December. So that's another chance for people to talk. I have learned that the town is not actually obligated to hold a hearing, but we're having a forum and a hearing months apart, just so we can get input. But again, hope all the commission can come and read and listen and see what's going on. Thank you.
Great. Does anyone have any questions on that piece?
Yeah, Janelle, the 30th meeting, are you anticipating that the zoning commission has to accept it at that meeting, or is that purely a informational?
So the 20th, October 20th?
20th, right?
Yeah,
20th.
so October 20th, 7 p.m. That's definitely an informational, open to all town residents. There won't be that formal acceptance because there might not necessarily be a quorum of the P&Z, nor is it official agendized P&Z material that evening. I do believe last that I checked with the chair, she was hoping to put it on to the November 9th agenda formally.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Mhm.
Yes.
And did you say that there was a format to be followed, and is that being published somewhere?
Yeah, so the PDF that's available online involves, there's a feedback form. I believe it's page 2 on there. There is a cover letter, and then there's a feedback form. The feedback form was devised by the steering committee simply to help guide the responses, to really target what it is that they were brainstorming and thinking about when they came up with the plan.
And where do we find that?
It's on the official town website. And I do believe it's embedded within that big PDF document.
Oh, the Cornwall Affordable Housing Plan draft? Okay.
Correct.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So I believe the feedback form that I referenced is, I believe it's page 2. And then I believe it is again at the end of the document right before the appendix.
Got it.
Great.
Janelle, do you envision that this will, at some future date, align with our current town plan? In other words, obviously, we're skewed off because it's going to be 2022, and we did the other plan in 2020, and this is every 5 years instead of every 10. But is that something that we ought to, it doesn't really matter at this point. I was just curious if that's probably something that would be an easier thing to do as part of our regular town plan of conservation.
James, it's such a thoughtful comment, especially because this year has thrown a lot of towns off, just making sure that they get these plans in. Cornwall was awarded that first round of funding, so Cornwall is certainly ahead of the game as far as the towns that are finalizing their plans, but it would be very nice to get it on a schedule that aligns with the POCD. The POCD is on a 10-year cycle, unlike the affordable housing plan, which is on a 5-year cycle. But I have seen some towns, instead of, because there is a housing section within the POCD, instead of actually update the housing section, then immerse the affordable housing section and really use that within the document more as a supplemental piece to the pre-existing town plan.
I think that would be, you know, hopefully I won't still be on the commission in 10 years, but I think that would make sense.
Yeah, and certainly the town plan was the basis for a lot of the steering committee's early discussions around brainstorming strategies. And especially because Cornwall's town plan is so robust when it does come to housing and housing strategies, there was a lot to work with.
Thanks. Shall we move on to the workshop meeting?
Yeah, so a good segue from that is just thinking back to the town plan, all of those action strategies that were then assigned to the P&Z and what we're prioritizing and trying to work our way through.
Let's see, one of the things that I did want to mention maybe before we jump into the workshop meeting formally, there was some discussion about the opt-out requirements, and that was brought to my attention. That's actually not due until January 1st, 2023. Is that my understanding? So at this point, we're going to put it on the a little bit more on the back burner, since there doesn't need to be action taken on that right away, even though I know there has been some discussion about that in the public, I guess. And then in terms of the workshop meeting, Janelle, you were talking about kind of doing an auditing of our current regulations, and which I'm not sure, did you send that out to everyone?
Yeah, and Anna actually wants to save that for the November meeting,
Okay.
just when the commission can dive more deeply into it. I just from having a discussion with her before she left for vacation, she really wanted the commission to come together and really, now that we've gotten through a few public hearings together, really rethink and brainstorm where it is that we're going, provided that there are new statutory updates that we do have to pay attention to at some point in time. As you mentioned, they're not as pressing as they may have seemed, but also thinking through the overall scope and priority of the commission. That was really in the chair's mind around reorienting everyone and then throwing in some educational pieces in there. So certainly refreshing all of us on the processes, the official processes that, you know, a special permit will entail or a public hearing, et cetera, as we digest the regulatory changes.
But I do think that that's a good idea for, since you volunteered to kind of do an audit of our current regs so that we can see where some real issues need to be addressed anyways. You know, even before we start in on the formal reformatting, that we can review and say, okay, that, you know, at a one-off, just looking at our current regs, here's some issues that really needed to be addressed anyways, and we'll keep that in our minds as we go through the process. So thanks for taking the time to do that.
Sure.
So in terms of the workshop meeting, how would you like to proceed this evening, Janelle?
Honestly, up to the commission. If you're at the point where you want to start digesting just some of the regulatory concerns, that's certainly what we can do. It's always up to the commission how you want to proceed.
I'd welcome some other comments if anybody has any.
Well, I think that would be great to, you know, at least get a list of the concerns that we're supposed to be paying attention to or will be paying attention to in the future, so that we know what's going on. And another thing that would be great, I think, would be some kind of a timeline. It may not be possible at this point, but maybe the November 2nd, at least we can get a good solid timeline that we can follow. I know they, Janelle, I saw that in the Cornwall Affordable Housing Plan. It made a lot of sense to me that that's how things get done. If we can, you know, get it listed out. I don't know if we can make any headway with either of those things today, but I think we should be at least prepared, or some information should be put together to be able to, follow those lines of thinking.
Yeah, I think it's always helpful. All things subject to change, of course, especially when you get into the hearing process, but to certainly have a timeline in mind just for scheduling purposes with the new calendar year before us, and just knowing how long some of these processes do take.
In terms of an overall timeline, I did get to speak to Janelle briefly about this. Both she and I thought were kind of on the optimistic side and thinking that the reformatting wouldn't take more than a year. So that was kind of off our goals, I think, but Janelle, correct me if.
Yeah, James, I think you were even more optimistic and
Yeah.
at first said 6 months. You're being really kind before the public eye. But yeah, I do, again, with so in speaking with, thinking through the timeline and really understanding some of the statutory changes that are beyond our control, those are sort of, I don't want to say easier because it's not the appropriate term, but those are the more obvious changes that will just need to come in order to make sure that our regulations are in compliance. So that said, doing that audit and going through the regulations and highlighting some sections of concern, there's the statute that's there to really inform why that change is being made. So that's where that optimistic timeline of about 6 months, I believe, at least to prepare that draft for the public hearing portion, I think is very realistic.
Is there a time when, or is there a time limit for getting statutory changes into our zoning? I mean, is that something that is critical to get done right away, or?
So the one timeline that James brought up is around Public Act 2129, which
Yeah.
is very specific when it comes to opting out of the accessory apartments.
Mhm.
So I know that we've chatted about this before, but just in brief, the long legislation session that just finished back in July had a lot of land use issues on the forefront. It was unprecedented in our state to see so many planning and zoning statutory changes just at a statewide level. So things passed, not everything passed, but there have been some overhauls to the framework in which we all do zoning in our state, and we will all move forward doing zoning. One of those being accessory apartments, and the statute is providing that towns shall allow them by right. Again, there is an opt-out provision in there, and the deadline for that opt-out provision is January 1 of 2023. Should the commission not act between now and January 1 of 2023, that's where the state statute will take control and basically say these are allowed by right, should the commission not take a decision. So pressing would be addressing accessory apartment by January 1 of 2023. And then there are some other items. Some are just around, as we've discussed as a group, that enabling statute, so 8-2, which is what the state has drawn up as the parameters around which a town has local zoning power. So 8-2 is truly the boundaries around which a state can locally control their land, or a town can locally control their land, rather. So it says what towns can and can't do. 8-2 was recently overhauled, and it was actually the first time that it was overhauled in such a comprehensive way. So it does bring into the matter some new changes, such as the requirement to allow for multifamily housing at least somewhere in town. the requirement that you cannot use preventing of overcrowding within your zoning regulations, because that's not what the state is now looking at zoning to do. So 8-2, we revisited as a group just to look through some of the changes. And I do remember we were dialing it back very much so, and really from our last discussion, keeping the regulations very close to what they currently are. I can pull it up because I actually have the regulations right here, but that is essentially your preamble to your body of your zoning regulations. So it gives a brief outline of what you do and what you don't regulate in town. And the state has recently changed that because of a lot of activism around housing, a lot of activism around equity, and a lot of activism around just diversity in land use. So that has pushed it our way because in essence, we're statutory in the way that we do business, provided that our limits, our parameters are actually told to us by our governing powers. We do have a lot of local control. We have a lot of local decision making that we utilize every single day, but there's this framework that we exist within, and that's recently been changed.
So I know we jumped into that pretty quickly. Is there a timeline for that to be completed?
No, there's not. Like it's effective October 1 of 2021, so it's already effective. So not in the sense that, you know, the state is not running around reading all of our local zoning regulations and coming to us and telling us we don't comply. But should there be a decision that's made beyond, you know, some sort of thing, or, you know, should there be any sort of need for clarity and we don't have it in our regulations, it's always good to be proactive on the local level.
Okay, and it doesn't the Cornwall Affordable Housing Plan that has just been, the draft that's just been sent out, I mean, that has a lot to do with everything that zoning is ultimately supposed to do as far as responding to the state new regulations, you know, the statutory changes. And so we really have to wait for that to be discussed with the public and kind of put into a tighter package before we should be altering or changing any zoning regulations. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yeah, I think that's I would certainly, I wouldn't just say, oh, we're going to wait and see what comes out of this affordable housing plan, because everything that we will address as far as the reorganization of the zoning regulations go will not be dictated or at least suggested to us by the Cornwall Housing Steering Committee. More so, as a commissioner, I'd definitely comprehensively look at the zoning regulations. In conversations with Anna Tamel as our chair, she's really wanted there to be more clarity around the processes to both the applicant and to the property owner. So a lot of those issues that are much more administrative and clerical, as far as clarifying, won't be informed by that affordable housing plan. And a lot of my understanding, at least when I started the work with the commission, was very much that the first tackle, and James, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, was to just get it organized in a sense, address some issues of language that's used. So indigent welfare housing is in the regulations now, just sort of updating a few of those terminologies that there are some, an example would be, so there's just words in there, just as far as updating a few of those, which certainly won't come after the housing plan, that have been discussed since I started working with the commission. So has it been over a year now? Maybe longer.
If I may, since for quite some time, we had talked about that our regs needed to be just kind of overhauled and gone through because they were piecemeal together over years and years, and different regulations came into play, just like our farming regulations or the accessory apartments, et cetera. So a lot of that stuff was just tacked on. And we did the best that we could where we can fit that stuff in, but it's really hasn't ever been done since the inception of the regs that we have gone through and looked at the document as a whole to make sure that it reads well, it's efficient for us to review if we have an application come before us, that we can, you know, find what we're looking for if things are in the right respective places in our regulations in general. And I think that was kind of the key point that we were hoping to just have a reformatting as well as a reorganization without any substantive changes happening to the document. So it was really just, okay, let's start and edit it, if you will, just from a structural standpoint instead of a content standpoint. And once that's in place, then also that would be a convenient thing for then the commission to become very familiar with the different segments where they, you know, what applies to what what specific regulations we're talking about. And then we can go through and say, you know, we can keep in the back of our minds or make a list as we're doing that, that this really needs to be looked at further, A, B, and C, things like the affordable housing piece, et cetera, and say, okay, this is an area that we really want to spend some more time in. But the first go around was just more of a reformatting to get us as a commission comfortable with the regs, as well as make them easier for the public to work with, as well as us to review applications. So
Yeah.
does that help?
Yeah. And James,
Janelle, I got a quick question when you get a moment.
yeah, of course.
Regarding the state and the statutory regulations that they've adopted in this past summer, how many of them are there that we're going to have to adjust our regulations for, roughly?
So, Steve, to answer your question, this would fall into those more substantive changes. And I'm pulling up your regulations right now to look at what I've highlighted. The top things that come to mind is honestly that accessory apartment provision, so that opt out. So in Article 1 right now, you have undue concentration of population. The state is wanting us to get rid of that because they're just wanting us to get rid of that in our language. So our powers aren't to control that.
But now my next question is, so we have a bunch of those that we have to address. If we don't address them, we'll get ourselves caught, you know, with our pants down because something will happen and we'll be in the wrong. So we do need to address these and we do need to take these to a public hearing?
Yeah, so any changes, any regulatory changes always, but in just looking through and looking at the statutes and then looking at the Cornwall regulations, it's not like there's not gross changes that need to be made other than what James was saying, just some of those updating of definitions, moving some things around. We reference a map, there's no map. There are some items like that, maybe making the overlay zones a little bit more legible instead.
No, that I get. I just want to know how much we have to conform to meet the state's guidelines.
And there's just one, and this isn't inherent in those new changes, but there are a few waiver provisions that are provided for within the regulations now. So there's a few nebulous sections that say if the commission wants to waive this requirement or condition this permit, they may allow. And as we know, case law, Mackenzie has taught us that we aren't in the place to make things uncertain for either the land user, the town, or for the general populace. So just clarifying things like that. A big example would be special permits. Should you wish to condition a special permit, which you have the power to do as a commission, you can, but you must specify what you might condition with. So you can have, hours of operation, parking, etc. But you just have to make it very clear for the user, the potential property owner, and for yourself as commissioner, the parameters in which you're working.
Okay.
But that's not in response to the recent changes. That's just an overall, upon reading them, an area that could use a little bit more clarity. And then there's just, I mean, we've discovered these as we've gone over the regulations and had applications. There's a few areas where there's either a few things that are in conflict or the wording isn't, just those types of things that we've all uncovered just by using the regulations over time.
So as far as the work, just to get, so I can get my head around this, so the way the workshop is going to work is, it sounds like you've gotten started on analyzing or rewriting some of the zoning regulations. You have not.
Nope. So not rewriting, not at that point. We are simply talking big picture, timeline, big picture processes. So we'll take it back. So when I first started working with the Planning Commission, it was all around the new adoption of the Plan of Conservation and Development. So in 2020, the new plan was adopted, and there are many action items for the P&Z to tackle. So I came into my first meeting, it was in person in the Cornwall Library, and I observed everyone with their regulations flipping. So there was an application, I was just there to monitor, to see the board, to interact with everyone, to watch an application be eventually approved. And I observed all the commissioners were just flipping in their regulations back and forth. And there was some conversation around different sections and where things were. And it was just insightful to me around just the general legibility of the document and understanding of the document. To James's point earlier, it really has been piecemealed over time, sections added, sections taken away, rather than comprehensively developed as a seamless document that's easy for the user, easy for the applicant, easy for the commission, and can be passed down as time goes on from commissioner to commissioner. So that became an important piece when I started work with former chair Jill Cutler. And then when Anna assumed that role, that was really a big piece of a lot of the upfront housekeeping work. So we always have referred to it as housekeeping work. And a lot of it just went into making sure that the framework of the processes were very clear, both for the commission, so that when they're deciding a decision on an application, they have the parameters of what it is they're deciding and what criteria they use for making those decisions. And so it was also clear for any applicant coming into town, what's expected of them for what it is that they're proposing to do.
Janelle, I know I can testify as somebody that both sits on the commission and also somebody that prepares applications for clients. Ours are very difficult in some ways to get through and follow. So I think that's a good thing for our commission to be doing, is working through this and trying to clean this up, because ours can be very difficult to get through or work through.
Yeah, if I may as well, that's not an original idea that was needed. So that's been on, I've been on the commission for a while now, and that was years and years ago. We talked about doing that as well, and it's just we didn't have the energy or the planning consultant now, Janelle, for willing to take on that task is great, because that's something that's been needed for quite some time and been discussed on the commission for quite some time. So this isn't a new concept to have a go over on our regs. So it is something that's past due, if you will.
Yeah, and James, just to your point, some of it will just be making the digital copy easier. So if a section is referenced, it will just link to the other section. So if you're looking at a special permit and you need an erosion and sedimentation control plan, that will be highlighted so you can click on it and then be directed straight to it. So that, again, it becomes more user-friendly, and it also becomes something, it's really important for the commissioners to understand, so that it can be wholly understood. And by working through it, I'm sure we will come across some substantive pieces of, oh, it says this, why does it say this? I've had a few funny conversations just for my own knowledge to clarify some things, like the sawmill and the cabin and different terms that get used, and just for their own clarification, so that one can pick up the document and it will be clear. It will be as clear to me as it will be to Karen, as it will be to Steve.
So to move forward along those lines, what type of input from the commission would you need, Janelle? Do you want to still have this, how can we be efficient for this process? A lot of it is the reformatting that's just reformatting. And some of it, obviously, you'll be highlighting sections that might be in conflict or needs to be addressed. But in terms of how the commission can act for this process, how do you envision that for us to be helpful for that process?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. What I would love to do is certainly get to work. I have started this work, and then we became preoccupied on getting a few pieces of the regulations revised. So going back to that point where we are comprehensively looking at the regulations, we've all met many times before, but starting back at the beginning and having the introduction, and we can certainly have screen share. While I display, the new work and what I'm working on and things that we'll be reformatting, to always keep the regulations as they're written, the effective regulations, next to you, so that we can be sure to make sure that they are matching up, and where they're not matching up, to understand why it is that they are changing, and whether it's a change that's coming from the commission as a board that wishes to see that change, whether it's motivated by the plan of conservation and development, which it's now 2021, soon to be 2022, that's on a 10-year cycle, or whether it's motivated by the higher powers that be, those Connecticut general statutes. So did that answer your question, just as far as work plan moving forward? I think piece by piece, I've outlined a few times, and I think it was circulated recently, but I'll send it around again, just where I was headed with moving the definitions to the front. I think that was a big topic of conversation, because the definitions govern a lot of what's in the regulations. And then, of course, having that introduction, what do the regulations do? What don't they do? Having the map, having the zoning districts, and then getting into the really substantive pieces, the use chapter. That'll be a big one, because where uses are and what uses are allowed is really the important pieces. I do know we've revisited a use table, so making sure that we have all the uses on one page. So if anyone wants to look and see where things are allowed in town and what uses are allowed in town, there'll be more visual references that one can turn to for those sorts of pieces. So a lot of,
be an addition.
What's that, Keith?
That would be an amazing addition.
So, and I mean, I'd actually be happy to bring this to our next meeting. I have the use table. I've prepared it both with the regulations that exist now, so we can look and see where things are allowed now in the zoning regulations that exist now. And some of those are just terms. So a lot of those uses never get defined. And that's a really good starting point, because if we're allowing a use, but we never define a use, and we're just allowing the dictionary that gets referenced in the regulations to discern for us what's being allowed in town, it doesn't actually give us as much guidance as we could actually give ourselves and give other residents and, all residents and all applicants information. So definitions are a really, really big piece, and uses are a really, really big piece, and they really do go hand in hand.
I like it.
What's that?
Did I like it?
So Janelle, we'll kind of just start on page 1 and work our way through the, I don't know, 100 pages of zoning regulations. Is that?
Yeah,
that's the idea?
it's,
Sorry, I'm having
yeah.
trouble, getting a total grasp, but
And then I get a quick question for you though. Every so often, will we bring it to public hearing? Like,
Yes,
complete the whole
yes.
thing. We'll do it like in quarters or eighths or twelfths, some sort of time period will pass, and then we'll go to, we'll bring it to a public hearing and then go forward again.
Yeah, so Steve, just thinking that through comprehensively, so I would hate to pass, let's just say, for example, chapter 1, general requirements and administration, chapter 2, a zoning map, and then chapter 3, permitted uses, and then not have a complete set. So as James put it before, the reorganization really does create the framework in which other things can then fall into and fit into. So getting through that entire framework piece, because in effect, we can't pass a quarter of a body of zoning regulations and then hope to see it through, but rather pass a comprehensive body, knowing that there's continuous work to do, because there always is, and then move through the more substantive changes.
Okay.
So, and I think the scope has always been this way. It's very much been, we got off track for a little bit, but it's very much been housekeeping, comprehensive, just reorganization, and then the more substantive potential changes, which have yet to be seen.
Yeah, and it was my intent, I know I've spoken along these lines before, is to pretend that there's no regulatory changes whatsoever, that it's strictly a reformatting there, the document, so that we don't have an issue with a public hearing being at all controversial. It's our regs, they're just in a reformatted situation. Our current regs, we pretend that the state didn't have any changes with the regulatory mandates, whatever's coming down the line, no opt-outs, no change to the housing, et cetera. I was kind of the divide and conquer guy, where we just reformat the regs the way they are. And then as we do that, we go through and we make note of, this is where we need more attention because it's not in compliance with A, B, and C. This is where we need more attention because everybody thinks this is stupid, whatever it is. And then we go back and go through our regs at that time to actually change the individual sections so that they become in compliance and become something that that the community can get behind. So that is still kind of but that's just me speaking, obviously.
I think, go ahead, Janelle. I think that's right.
That's how I've also seen it. It helps me to understand the process if I think of it that way.
And I think it just helps all the commissioners as you digest the regulations. You yourself will have things highlighted asking, what does this mean, or where does this fit, and those sorts of questions.
I think we could spend a lot of time if we try to make the regulations right and reformat them in the same go around, and also then trying to get that passed in front of the community to get everybody on board with that, I think is too much to chew.
By the time we get that done, we'll be at the next 10-year plan, I think.
Yeah.
We try to do it that way.
So that's why I was just hoping maybe we can strictly do a reformatting, in which case I wouldn't expect that process to be, that's more of just Janelle's work, basically, to say, okay, it's really editorial of what should be in what section, in what belongs where in our documents, without changing any of the structure, or not the structure, but the content. So, but that's obviously, if she's doing the bulk of the work here, I'd still respect her decision on how she wants to handle that. But that would be my suggestion.
But that was kind of my point, that Janelle really has to kind of do her thing first before we can actually jump in and put our questions and comments in, doesn't she? James?
Yeah, I mean, if I was editing the document, that's what I would prefer to do, is actually say, okay, you know, here's my first go at an editorial way of looking at it, bring that to the commission. And maybe it's even in a broader picture where, you know, the higher level view is this segment should be here, this segment should be here, and I see this segment being, you know, incorporated into some other, whatever the logistics of the actual regulations. And we can then say, you know, either that makes sense from our perspective or it doesn't, because we like, you know, what, you know, however the formatting is going to end up looking. But that would, I think, be a good first start in terms of another way to look at it, instead of just starting at page 1 and reading through our regs, because I think we can get bogged down with individual words and concepts instead of just trying to get this thing as a cohesive document that makes more sense logically.
So then, just to clarify, we really won't have anything to do for 6 months while she's doing this.
Well,
Don't you
typical
guys like
business.
how I made that work, right? That's
I think at some point though, we can't let it go so far that if we see what Janelle shouldn't do 6 months worth of work and then we say, oh, we don't like that formatting at all. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
start from scratch, so there's got to be some input along the way from us.
Right.
I imagine we'll discuss this every month at our meetings, and we'll have typical business to go through, applications to review and whatnot. It will still continue. But yeah, maybe it'll be a little bit milder 6 months than it has been, but I think we deserve that.
well, it's also not, I mean, from what I was just, I'm kind of talking on my feet here to try to at least think how this might work. And I certainly welcome Janelle's input since she's going to be doing the bulk of this. But if that was the case where she could then get back to us and say, I see that these, this is where I see problems from a formatting standpoint. What do you think about me putting this here and this here and this here? And we say either that's great or not. And so that's a constant input where she's then rewriting a segment and locating it where it should be in a grander scheme of a new document. So if you will, she could come before us next month with a table of contents, if you will, and say, this is how I'm envisioning our new regs to look, how they would look, with the definitions up front and with these pieces of the document being placed in this order. And that would be a feedback right off the bat. Okay, once that's settled, then she can then make those moves and say, the next level is I'm incorporating this into here, and we want to really look at this structure. And then, so it's, I think, we'd want to be kept abreast of that the whole time and in that constant feedback. It wouldn't, but I, if I was tasked with that, that would be off the top of my head a way that I'd like to pursue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so James, just to jump in, can you guys hear me all right?
Mhm.
Okay, little connectivity glitch. So I would really love to do just like a visioning maps because I'm very visual. So you can look at sort of me essentially mapping out where I've envisioned the regulations. We've gone over this before as a group when we first embarked on this journey, and then get feedback as to just the overall flow of the document, and then keep moving from there. Every step along the way, any sort of big decision, to always have the commission, as we have, we were revisiting the regulations word for word at our past meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be more efficient from the commission standpoint if we weren't going to that detail right off the bat. If we can see a broader scale of how you're thinking that overall document would look like, and then
Great, that's great, because then that gives me a lot of time to have presentation pieces and then a lot of work on the back end that I'm taking on.
As a caveat, though, I am stepping in tonight. Anna, I think, should really also have some say in how this moves forward, as well as the other commission members that aren't present. So that's how I can see it happening, but I'm not sure if we want to maybe just touch base with that when our chairperson returns.
Yeah, I agree.
In terms of tonight,
Anybody have any questions? Because
No, that was very informative. That helped out a lot, sort of structuring how we're moving forward on this whole issue. I appreciate all that.
yeah, I think it's helpful just to reorient everyone. We have some new members to the group. Some of this work has been, taken in different directions. So I think just to get back to the basics, map it out, and then move forward.
in terms of the rest of the time this evening, 8 o'clock. Do you, is there something else, Janelle, you think would be worth time in terms of the workshop meeting that we should be thinking about over the next?
I would love to just reiterate what I will have prepared for the next meeting, just to make sure that we all had that same conversation, because there were a lot of great ideas. So one is just a mapping piece. So more so the overall outline of what the regulations currently consist of, and then where those pieces will fit in the update. A timeline piece. So we briefly talked about that 6-month timeline, but really, think it through on the calendar with when our commission meetings are scheduled. And then again, all things change, but just roughly, I'll put this into a calendar for each meeting that we have a workshop meeting, have a general topic of discussion. So next meeting will be overall outline. The following meeting, hopefully we'll get into definitions and uses, and I'll map it out so that we see where we're going with that. And then, did I miss any other piece? The statutory audit.
You said you had that use table that you could bring, right?
Yeah, sure. So why don't we do that? So let's do the mapping of the table of contents, the overall timeline, month by month, topical timeline, and then the use table. And the use table will really be the beginning of the discussion around definitions. And I'll start to highlight where words are used, but where they're never defined.
If you could also, Janelle, I'm wondering if you can compare how our current regs and its table of contents might reflect in the new regs, where currently we've got things spread all over, but these are the same items and they're going to be located here instead.
Yeah, so I was thinking being so visual of like a flow chart so that you could see that juxtaposed. So regulations now, regulations to come, and then a quick flow chart of how it's all set up and where things will go.
Perfect.
I'll make it as legible as possible and graphically aesthetic as possible for all of us.
Thanks.
Great. So I have those 3 deliverables for next time. November, again, also that the affordable housing piece. And I just want to reiterate the affordable housing piece. So any suggestions coming from that affordable housing piece will always go through the same processes. So any regulatory changes, any suggestion from that document, public hearing, formal adoption process, the commission will then be tasked also with the language. So all of those details, of course, would fall on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Unless an outside applicant brings forth zoning amendments, because that's always a possibility.
Hasn't happened since I've been here.
Any questions from the commission on those workshop pieces?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And as statute questions come up, always feel free to ask. It's definitely not always easy reading or easy researching, and that's absolutely my job. So if there's something that pops into your head where we're like, why do we do this? Or is there a background? I would really love to include within the regulatory update, if there's a statute that's governing why things are done a certain way, to actually have that, like Connecticut General Statute 21-29 in there, so that the commission knows and so that the public knows. I think it's an informative piece. A lot of the things that we do don't actually come, from the local zoning commission.
Right. No, that would be really helpful.
I like that idea.
It's helpful. Just, you're like, where does this come from?
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Karen, anything else you can think of for us?
No, I think Janelle has done an excellent job pointing out. And frankly, Keith, I'm going to second your motion on a use chart. That is one of the most helpful pieces. And yes, Janelle, I know that you already started working on it. It brings a lot of clarity to a conversation when you talk about or even organization and where to go. Incredible amount of clarity. Yeah.
Shall I hear a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
guys. Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
all.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye. I need a